Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Everybody. I was sort of listening for themes, and one of the themes I got a couple of times was if I'm unable to sort of express what I want. That was sort of a big thing. If I am unable to say what I want things to be stopped. Okay? And that's a common theme that I hear. Barbara, you used the expression beyond repair, which I kind of liked. If there was no hope of regaining health. So again, a lot of this is sort of not all of it, but some of it seemed to be about if I'm done, if I can't be healthy, if I can't have a life, if I can't speak and talk, I don't want to be kept alive. There's sort of a theme, right? And then, of course, there was, nobody spoke of loss of physical ability the way you did, but I think I've come across that too. If I can't get out of bed and I can't walk and I can't do things, I don't want to continue. A lot of talk about memory and remembrance, and then also spirituality came up several times. Importance of loved ones, recollections of loved ones and loved ones' engagement, even to the point of being kept alive so that loved ones could come and say goodbye. And then, of course, I heard sort of again and again, I heard the whole comfort measures, right? I want to be kept comfortable. I don't want to be, I wrote it down a couple of times here. I thought I did, but I want morphine, I want comfort measures, I want pain medications. It was interesting to me that different people had sort of different focuses, but what I didn't hear a lot of, I heard some of it, but what I didn't hear a lot of is, well, it all kind of depends on what's wrong with me. It's like what you're going to do if I can't tell you what to do sort of depends on what's wrong with me. I mean, the people who said, there's no hope of my recovery if I've lost my capacity and that's gone, I don't want to be kept alive. But some people are just like, this is how I want to die. Not, this is what I want the doctors to do, depending on what's wrong with me. It sort of stood out for me. People weren't saying, well, if I have whatever disease and it's really not going to get better, then I want all the, whatever it may be, my loved ones, spirituality, et cetera. And that sort of struck me. Sort of as a doctor, I mean, the first question I'm asking is, what's wrong with me and what can you do? Before we start talking about this dying stuff. Okay? But hang on to these. Here's mine. I'll read it to you. In the event that I am very seriously ill and no longer have the capacity to direct my medical treatment, I want to be provided all indicated medical interventions that might affect my recovery, including intubation, resuscitation, nasogastric, and/or parenteral feeding. So parenteral feeding is getting fed through an IV. Nasogastric is a tube that goes in your nose and into your stomach. You can be fed. And surgery. If, however, it becomes the opinion of my attending doctor or doctors that despite my having been provided a reasonable trial of medical therapy, I will be highly unlikely to recover my capacity to understand and direct my care. So that's the theme that I heard here. If I'm not going to regain my capacity to understand and direct my own care, if I'm not going to get my marbles back, okay? I wish to have all interventions stopped and to be provided with palliative sedation with no other interventions until my death, regardless of my prognosis for long-term survival and regardless of whether palliative sedation will hasten my death. For those of you who don't know, palliative sedation is you get put to sleep and you get kept asleep until you're dead. Okay? So you're not being murdered, but you are being kept asleep and you die from dehydration because you're not eating or drinking. Okay? If I am terminally ill and my death is reasonably considered imminent, I have a typo there, is reasonably considered imminent regardless of the provision of medical interventions, I also wish to be provided palliative sedation until my death. Imminent means within 2 weeks. So I got really granular in mine because I've seen how this can really go wrong in the hospital. You can't argue with this. You can't argue with this. Okay. What's interesting is that, like you guys, we're focused on sort of the spirituality of this. I didn't go there at all, right? I didn't go there at all. I'm like, here's what I want you to do or not do. My friends can horse around in the room if they want to and tell jokes about me. I'm good with that. But I personally didn't feel sort of the need to, it's funny, I really wasn't taking my loved ones into consideration at all with this. I'm like, this is what I want you to do with my body. Okay? And maybe that sort of comes out of my experience in hospitals where I see god-awful things happen to people's bodies, as you do at Presbyterian. And imminent, by the way, I wrote down imminent means 2 weeks because lawyers will argue about this. I couldn't find a medical definition of imminent. I mean, most people who are reasonable say imminent means today. I've heard legal people in hospitals go, well, imminent sometime within the next 3 months. I'm like, you're crazy. So I wanted to be specific about what this means so nobody could argue about it. So I've probably had about 10,000 patients die. And I've seen horrific deaths, like we see, and horrific lives filled with suffering, 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 and then death. People whose lives are robbed of them by things like premature serious illness, untreatable mental illness, substance abuse, alcoholism, just lives that are ruined and robbed of people. But I have done this over and over and over, and every time I do it, it comes out different. I changed it today, 7 hours ago. I'm sitting in front of me. No, that's not what I meant. I meant this. And I've been doing palliative care since 2004 and medicine since '83. I want to sort of point out that there's 2 huge distinguishing factors that I believe are really relevant in considering a living will, which is, number 1, terminal illness, which you sort of got to. So, terminal illness. Okay? So terminal illness means the person is going to die of their illness, period, regardless of what treatments are provided. Okay? I'm not going to tell you that doctors know that someone is going to die, but I will tell you that there's a huge amount of data out there. There's a huge amount of science that allows doctors to predict with enormous confidence whether or not someone will die of an illness. To my mind, a terminal illness, which is something like advanced heart disease, for example, or advanced neurologic disease like dementia, or advanced lung disease like pulmonary fibrosis. These are things that we can look at in a linear way and know when the end of life is coming. But there's another critical element that some of you, but not all of you, got to in the living will, which is mental capacity. Okay? It's what do I want if I'm alive and I'm not going to die, but I don't have my brain anymore? Right? This is this is an enormous issue in medicine. It's an enormous issue in medical ethics, and there are facilities across this country filled with incapacitated people who haven't made these kinds of decisions, and filled with incapacitated people for whom both their loved ones and their caregivers and their doctors kind of really don't know exactly what's going on. I'm going to get more into that. These are people with brain injuries. And I want to point out that brain injuries typically fall into 2 categories. Okay? One category is a disease. Okay? So you might get a disease like meningitis and be in a coma and wake up and be fine. Okay? Or you might get a disease like meningitis and be in a coma and not recover fully. You may have a stroke, or you may have dementia. Those are sort of medical neurologic brain diseases. There's also, the worst of it, which we see, is what's called an anoxic encephalopathy. Okay, so this is what happens to the brain in an individual for reasons unrelated to their brain stops breathing. Drowning, cardiac arrest. So a person has a heart attack, heart stops beating, breathing stops, falls on the floor, ambulance shows up, 7 minutes later, CPR starts, but their brain has been deprived of oxygen and blood flow for a period of 5, 7, 8 minutes. Okay? It's a horrifying injury to the brain. And we know so little about the outcomes. People go into coma immediately. We'll talk more about that. And then there's trauma. Okay? So trauma is you get hit in the head. You go through your windshield, somebody hits you with a baseball bat, you get shot in the head. Happens all the time. Gabby Giffords. Remember Gabby Giffords? She was a congresswoman. She was campaigning in a parking lot, I think it was Arizona. Someone came up and shot her point blank in the forehead. Bullet went right through her skull, came out the other side. They brought her to the hospital and they took her skull off to let her brain swell without being injured. If it swelled up inside the cavity of the skull, it would have just destroyed itself. They let it swell, and they let the swelling come back down, and about 2 months later, they put her skull back on, and now she walks and talks. But she was in profound coma for weeks and weeks and weeks. To me, terminal illness is actually, and you'll forgive me, it's actually kind of easy. The decision-making process in terminal illness is kind of easy. Most people will say, once they know the facts, most people will say, treat me until it's not really working anymore. Treat me until my quality of life is so bad that I don't want treatment anymore. And then as I get sicker, give me the comfort measures, give me the morphine, keep me home, have my friends be in my presence, have chanting. Most people choose that with terminal illness, but it happens to be pretty straightforward. Brain disease, neurologic illness is harder. So I did research for this talk today, and I have to tell you, I got more and more into it. I'm like, oh my God. And I kept changing my living will and changing my living will and changing my living will. And even the living will that I wound up with, I don't like. It's not my living will. And I'll tell you why as we go on. What if I'm physically okay and I'm mentally kind of okay? Like I had a brain injury, I had a meningitis, I had a brief heart attack, and I didn't get oxygen to my brain for a minute instead of 7. And everybody's sort of standing around my bed kind of scratching their heads going, well, is he awake? Is he seeing us? Is he hearing us? Is he thinking? What's going on? I'm lying there going, yeah, I'm kind of here. But I can't tell anybody. Do I want to die? Or she says she wants to die. But other people might say, you know what? This is kind of okay. I'm okay with this. My family comes around. I see the sun go up and down. Actually, it's not as bad as I thought it would be. What if I'm mentally incapacitated, but I still have the ability to have some fun, to love and be loved? Then what? I'm giving you guys a warning about living wills. Okay. This comes from the New York State Office of the Attorney General. New York State does not have a law governing living wills. In other words, there's not a statute on a book that's the living will law. Okay? But the appellate court, which is the highest court from which you go to the Supreme Court, has said what you write in a living will is reasonably considered to be, it is taken as what you want. And what you write on a living will must be acted on. And the reason that I'm saying warning is because what you write in a living will must be acted on. We'll talk more about that. So I downloaded this from the National Hospice and Palliative Care Association. They revised it in 2017. I wonder if they rewrote it as many times as I rewrote mine. But let's read it. It kind of follows a lot of sort of what was said here, except for the spiritual and family and friendship and memory and remembrance component. And it was interesting listening to that because you guys were sort of saying less about what you want the doctors to do and more about sort of how you want the process of your dying to go. But it was not about under what circumstances is my dying going to proceed and how medically will that look. Now, I just kept going back and forth with this like dozens of times and putting, not dozens, but at least a dozen times. And I put in green the stuff that I thought was reasonable. And I put in red the stuff that just set off alarm bells in my head all over the place. I do not want my life to be prolonged if I should be in an incurable or irreversible mental or physical condition with no reasonable expectation of recovery, including but not limited to a terminal condition, a permanently unconscious condition. No. You did that. A permanently unconscious condition in which I am permanently unable to make decisions or express my wishes. Blah, blah, blah. Then I don't want intubation. I don't want resuscitation. Intubation is the tube down your throat in your windpipe connected to the life support machine. Okay, tube feeding, et cetera. Cardiac resuscitation is CPR, et cetera, et cetera. The stuff in red is the stuff that, as a doc who's been around the block 10,000 times, I can tell you causes real problems. And it's the neurologic stuff that I want you guys to be aware of. And when we get to the end of this talk, I'm hopeful that you'll sort of have a better idea of where to go with this. So I read this. I read minimally conscious condition. And I went, I think I know what that is, but I think I better go and look it up again before I start yammering at these poor people who are actually listening to me. Okay. So this comes from a book called The Neurology of Consciousness, written in 2016, saying a minimally conscious state is a condition of severely altered consciousness. It's a different kind of consciousness from spiritual consciousness, I might add. This is about whether or not you're awake and thinking and hearing, right? That is distinguished by the presence of minimal but clearly discernible behavioral evidence of self or environmental awareness. It's like, what? I can tell you that this is easy to recognize at the bedside. Okay? This is a person who kind of looks like they're understanding, but sort of kind of doesn't look like a regular person who's understanding. And you're sort of saying, hi, Mr. Smith, hi, how are you? And they're like, are you feeling pain? And you pinch him in the armpit, which we're allowed to do. And Mr. Smith sort of pulls away. It's like, oh, so he felt pain. Mr. Smith's daughter comes up to the bedside and says, hi, Dad. He looks and smiles, and then stops, and a gaze drifts away. Do you think us doctors know what's going on in his head? We don't. This comes from Domains of Well-Being in Minimally Conscious Patient, Illuminating a Persistent Problem from the American Journal of Bioethics, Neuroscience from 2018. Go figure, right? People get out of bed in the morning, this is what they do. Assessing the quality of life of patients who are only intermittently conscious, are largely non-communicative, and who have unknown cognitive capacity is just as difficult as it sounds. I mean, doesn't that sound like a statement like he's just talking to the guy sitting next to him on the train? It's like, this is really hard stuff. This is not like docs talking to each other. This is just hard. It's hard for anybody. There is neurophysiologic evidence that people feel pain, so it means they've done fancy studies to show that people feel pain. You can just pinch someone in their armpit, they'll pull away, you know they're feeling pain. But it remains unclear what else they experience. Suppose minimally conscious people are capable of experiencing a variety of mental states beyond physical pleasure and pain. How do their experiences contribute to or detract from their quality of life? Individuals often undergo a significant shift in their desires, attitudes, goals, and values after a major injury or disease, which makes it difficult to ascertain what a patient's current values or interests might be. The barriers to communication with minimally conscious patients itself poses a major hurdle to investigating their quality of life. It's like I said, what if I'm lying there, I'm like, hey guys, I'm kind of okay. I'm sort of a little better, and they don't know, because I can't talk. There's a big medical ethical issue. Another thing it had on the living will, the standard like New York State living will, was permanently unconscious. Again, I put stuff in red and green because it struck me as like fair versus kind of not fair. An incurable, so I can tell you if somebody has a mental condition that's incurable. I can tell you if somebody has advanced dementia. I can say that's incurable. Okay. And irreversible. If you had said to me when Gabby Giffords got shot through the head, is she going to get better or is she going to be able to talk again? I would have said, I don't know. I said, is this irreversible? I have no idea. We got to wait and see. But a lot of people would have said, well, are you kidding? She got shot through the head, through the brain. You should see the x-rays. Is medically assessed as having no reasonable probability of recovery from an irreversible coma or a permanent vegetative state. This, I couldn't find a medical definition of permanently unconscious, so this came from a law dictionary. And I read it, and I'm like, what? I don't know what this means at all. Because it's got so much backpedaling and hedging and hesitating. I mean, there's a contradiction in terms here, right? It says, an incurable and irreversible condition which is assessed as having no reasonable probability. It's incurable and irreversible. So why are we talking about whether there's a reasonable probability? I mean, the dictionary is contradicting itself. So what do loved ones think when they read this nonsense or doctors say it to them? Well, this is incurable, but we don't know. Maybe there's an unreasonable chance you might get better.
But isn't it, I mean, in Kathy Gifford's case, where they removed her skull and let her brain breathe till the swelling came down, that's...
I think it was Gabby Giffords. Kathy Giffords is the TV personality who you might not like, but
no,
I know, I'm not kidding.
Anyway, it's because modern medicine is so advanced and this.
But
if this had happened to her 20 years ago,
she would have been dead. 20 years ago, they just would have been scooping up her body from the parking lot.
So,
but had you asked her neurosurgeon on day 3 after they removed her skull, is she going to get better? They were.
But she's raising a good point. Technology is changing pretty rapidly.
But what I'm saying is that.
Enough, and the doctors wanted to take the
Yes,
chance.
yes.
But if you are 80 years old, why should you want to go through all this?
It's your choice.
Or if you're 70 years old.
It's your choice.
You know?
I'm getting there.
I mean,
Watch
a
out.
lot of us are not that
It's your choice. It's your choice.
When we are loved. I
It's
mean,
your
that's
choice.
a cultural thing also.
But it's your choice. It's not her choice, maybe. Maybe it is. I think it is her choice. It may not be mine. It's your choice.
Because you're a doctor.
But I'm trying to point out to you that it gets vaguer and vaguer and vaguer the closer you look at it. Okay? By the way, I've never heard of anything called a permanent vegetative state. I've heard it called a persistent vegetative state, but never a permanent vegetative state. I'm like, well, so is that different? Is persistent and permanent different? Coma. Want to get more confused? This came from University of Pittsburgh Medical Center website for patients. A person in a coma is alive but can't wake up. That's true. Someone in a coma is not able to respond in an appropriate way to what is around him or her. That's true. People in comas, you can't wake them up. You shake them and you pinch them and you can't wake them up. They're asleep. Okay. But I loved what they then wrote, thinking they were being helpful. It is difficult to predict how long someone will be in a coma. A coma rarely lasts for more than 2 to 4 weeks, but a persistent vegetative state may last for years. Some people never wake up from a coma. A person may wake up from a coma with physical, intellectual, or emotional problems. Some never regain more than basic responses. However, many recover full awareness. If the injury is severe, it may affect the person's recovery. A person does not suddenly wake up from coma. It is a gradual process. Every person recovers at a different rate. The reason that this isn't shocking to you guys is because you've been listening to Donald Trump for the last year. I mean, really? I read this, I'm like, this is what they're showing patients and families? Because I'm reading this and my loved one is in a coma, I'm like, what in hell? This it hasn't helped me at all. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. We don't know, could be 2 weeks, could be a year, might be intellectually disabled, could recover fully. I'll show you. I read this and I was like, what? What? Oh, come on. Like, you're supposed to be helping people make decisions. I'd be like in patient relations going to take this website down before other people get really upset.
It seems like you're so afraid of being wrong about something, you know, about giving the wrong, that you have to just make everything possible. You know? They may recover, maybe not at all. But
So-
you're so afraid of being wrong because it's death and it's nothing.
So the wise practitioner says, based on my experience, this is what I believe will happen. And this is what I would like you to understand will happen, bearing in mind that there's a small chance I could be wrong. And if I am wrong, I apologize. And if I am wrong, great. But you need to understand that this is where things are going. Not, well, you know, it could be better. People's hearts are on the line. A persistent vegetative state is a disorder of consciousness in which patients with severe brain damage are in a state of partial arousal rather than true awareness. After 4 weeks in a vegetative state, the patient is classified as in a persistent vegetative state. It is diagnosed as a permanent vegetative state, some months, 3 in the US and 6 in the UK. I wonder why it's 6 in the UK, after a non-traumatic brain injury or 1 year after a traumatic brain injury. So traumatic brain injury, remember, is the gunshot to the head, it's the crack with a baseball. The non-traumatic is the meningitis, the not getting oxygen to your brain, medical issues. Okay? Nowadays, more doctors and neuroscientists prefer to call the state of consciousness an unresponsive wakefulness syndrome, primarily because of ethical questions about whether a patient can be called vegetative or not. You're the family member. You're the patient. And the current science is, hell if we know. We don't really know. It says on his living will that if he's permanently incapacitated, he doesn't want any of this stuff. Is he there? I don't know. I'm going to summarize this for you. This really horrified me. How often is the diagnosis of permanent vegetative state incorrect? A review of the evidence from a study from April of this year. Okay? Some research suggests that 40% of people with vegetative state are misdiagnosed. Remember, they've called the neurology specialist to come in and see the neurologist because, yeah, it's a vegetative state. 40% of times, it's maybe wrong. So they may be saying, you're not conscious, you're not connecting with the environment, you're not thinking, you're not feeling, you're not communicating, but you are. They're wrong. Okay? 5 clinical studies of the rate of misdiagnosis in practice were identified. Okay? 34% of patients were reclassified as having some degree of awareness, sometimes minimal. Other studies were small and poorly done and subject to bias and weren't repeated. The essence in science, when you do science, is you do the experiment and you show your results, and then people have to repeat it and get the same results before it becomes accepted. So these weren't repeated, some of these studies. The few single case reports suggest that failure to ensure an accurate diagnosis of the underlying neurologic damage and dysfunction could rarely lead to significant misdiagnosis in patients who had brainstem damage, et cetera. So what they're talking about is there's a part of your brain that doesn't have anything to do with thinking. Okay, it controls things like respirations and blood pressure and movement and that sort of stuff. So that's gone. So your body is kind of, it's not controlling your body at all, but the part of your brain that does thinking is still there. That's what they're saying. So this is showing you that the best neurologist at Presbyterian comes along, and this is not exact science. They're getting it wrong sometimes. More what's for me. I was just astonished by this. Functional MRIs, you guys may have heard, there's now something called functional MRI. So a functional MRI is when they put you in the MRI machine, it takes really nice pictures of your brain in cross-section, and what they do is they give you glucose that has a radioisotope in it so they can see where your brain becomes most active because it uses a lot of glucose and sort of lights up. It's called a functional MRI. Do all kinds of stuff. with functional MRIs. Give people different experiences and see which parts of their brain are sort of engaging those experiences. They've done studies on sociopaths in prisons who've committed awful crimes but who are sociopaths who have no sense of morality, and done functional MRIs on them and found out that the part of their brain that it lights up in people who do have the ability to be empathetic and have morality doesn't light up. It's just gone. They have no physical capacity. So a question then becomes, if you're a sociopath, is it mental illness, and should you be treated like a mentally ill person rather than a criminal? Current research suggests that 10 to 24% of the patients who are unambiguously judged to be in a persistent vegetative state on clinical grounds, okay? So these are the people who are, we know you're in persistent vegetative state because really smart people who know about this examined you and we have no question about the diagnosis. It's not the up to 43% of people that got misdiagnosed, right? It's not the 43% of people that got misdiagnosed up front. They took those out. They said, no, these aren't in vegetative state. Show clear evidence on functional MRI or electroencephalogram of understanding and being able to follow commands. So the person is lying there, they're understanding, they're hearing, they're thinking, they're responding. You say to them, think about playing tennis, and they picture it in their mind. And that part of their brain lights up. But they can't show you, they can't show it to you like we normally show each other what we're thinking and feeling. Does everybody remember Terri Schiavo? So there was, it became like a right-wing, left-wing thing in Florida, right? So Terri Schiavo is this young woman who's judged to be in persistent vegetative state, and her husband wants to pull her feeding tube and let her die, and her family doesn't. And it becomes a Republican-Democrat thing, a liberal-conservative thing, where, and a religious thing, where some people are saying it's murder, you're murdering her. Look, there she is with her mom. How can you pull her feeding tube out? But does that look like somebody to you who's engaging with her mom? Does it? Are you not sure? Nor is anybody else. That's my point. I looked at this photograph really closely. She's not looking at her mom. She's looking just off to the side. She got her feeding tube pulled and she went to heaven. That's what she looked like before she got sick. Kills you. Brain death. Brain death's an easy one. Brain death is like, I took a saw and I sawed off the top part of your skull and I scooped your brain out and put the top part of your skull back on again. Can a person like that be alive? Yeah, we put them on a ventilator machine, breathe for them, their heart will keep going and going and going and going. No brain in their skull. If you do an EEG, an electroencephalogram on somebody who has brain death, there's no electrical activity, there's just nothing. It's dead. And in New York State, that defines death. A person who is defined as brain dead, there's a whole protocol in the hospital, which you've probably seen. A person who is defined as brain dead is dead and may be taken off of life support with neither the permission of the patient or the family, because they're dead. I've never seen it happen where they got taken off of life support without the family going, okay.
And what does it maybe depends on financially or?
It's a good question. But it's sort of beyond the scope of what I want to talk about, but could talk to you more about it later, if you want. This is a New Yorker article from this year about a young African-American woman who was declared brain dead at a hospital, and her family refused to cooperate. It's really worth reading. It's really worth reading. And it talks about the history of the definition of brain death. The history of the definition of brain death has a huge amount to do with the history of organ donation in this country.
That's very controversial.
Yeah. So she died just recently, the young woman in the article. She died, that was her mom.
I don't know whether she was, the issue that the other.
Yeah.
Wants to know what issue the New Yorker.
All you have to do is just Google, what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to die? Okay. And this is a quote from her mom after she died. Now, if you had asked me, I would have gone, she's dead. But read this article. This is Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska. I just put it up there because it's pretty. Because this was getting really bad. I was having a hard time with it. Imagine how you guys were feeling. It's Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska. In Alaska, Wrangell St. Elias. It's right next to Kluane National Park, a provincial park in the Yukon. And together, they're 17 million acres. It's the largest set-aside of wilderness in the entire world that nobody's ever heard of. You have to fly to get into the interior of it on a charter flight. Yellowstone National Park, by way of reference, is 4 million acres. Alaskans call that Alaska cotton. You see it's glaciated in the background. It's a very severe landscape. It's treeless and elevated and cold and windy. The only noise is your voice and the voice of your traveling companion and the wind and the water. That's it. There's no cell reception. None. We brought a little satellite phone in case we got into trouble, which we did. So it's a good thing we had it. You find yourself thinking about not death in a place like this, but you find yourself thinking about eternity in a place like this. You find yourself thinking about the Earth as billions of years old, and these glaciers which travel millimeters a day that have traveled hundreds of miles. And you find yourself thinking about the carving out of valleys. And you find yourself thinking about yourself having come from this and returning to it. There's nothing else to do. There's no entertainment other than walking.
Do you remember Jerry Nielsen, the woman who went to the South Pole?
I do, I think
and
so.
got breast cancer there, and I interviewed her when she came back.
Mhm.
She was in remission, and I asked her what was the best thing about being in
Mhm.
Antarctica, and because there's nothing but millions of miles of snow, just
Mhm.
white,
Mhm.
and total whiteout in the winter. And she said, I heard the voice of God there.
So
Because you're alone with yourself and with the
I'm going to be dropping some psilocybin pretty soon so that I can meet God, but right now, this is as close as I got. This was as close as I got. And it wasn't really God. It was the expanse of the planet and time. Because you look at it and you're like, oh my God, this has been here for so long. And you find a crystal on the ground that's been there for 7 million years. Same living will I had up for you guys before. So how are we feeling about irreversible mental condition? How are we feeling about permanently unconscious condition? How are we feeling about a minimally unconscious condition? Getting some sense of why you got to be cautious about living wills?
Can I just say something? The one experience I had was a woman who had a brain bleed, I guess,
Mhm.
and the doctors wanted to pull the plug, but my friend who knew her said, no, I sense that she is responding. Anyway, long story short, she's now fine. A little just one of her legs, she has a hard time with her motor skills, but they could have killed her.
So we need a machine that turns a gut sense into a measurable clinical outcome.
So, I guess the question
The gut sense level is 9. We're keeping her on the machine.
But is there a time when you know, like this woman?
I thought yes, but after I read this, I was like, what am I going to tell these poor people who are coming to listen to me? The bottom line is that we as doctors may simply not be able to say that you have met the criteria you established as necessary to follow your wishes. You guys wrote different kinds of living wills, but there was this allusion to if I am permanently unable to. And the problem is that we can look at that and go, I don't know if we're permanently unable to. It's not because we're stupid, but because science is inexact and because it's evolving. The science of this is evolving. We'll know more in 10 years and 20 years. You may find yourself in the care of a doctor who will not follow your wishes because, one, there is sufficient uncertainty about your condition, and two, he or she believes following your wishes, given that uncertainty, is unethical. Good people did not want to take the feeding tube out of Terry Schiavo. I've seen this happen in the intensive care unit. I don't know if you have. I've seen it happen. Where they're looking at the living room and they're going, that's not this. And everybody knows what the person wanted. What the person wanted was to get off the machine, but that's not what was actually written on the paper. It will also come as no surprise that the doctors who are caring for you generally do not have the expertise to make these distinctions, even if they could clearly be made. Most would have difficulty even defining these terms. I've been doing this for a really long time, and I was like, what is minimally unconscious? I better look it up. Even most neurologists don't know this stuff. And even the experts don't know the answers.
But Dr. Joe, in many cases, there is, like for example, very concretely, Jackie Kennedy. She was not in any of these states, but she knew that she had terminal cancer. She had had enough. She came back from the hospital and she decided to pull the plug. And she had a doctor who cooperated with her.
So you said something that was very important, and I don't want to spend a whole lot more time on this, but you said she had terminal cancer.
Yeah.
I said to you earlier, I said you're not going to like this, but that's easy. Because it is terminal cancer, and you know it's terminal, and you can make that choice.
But she could have lived for another 6 months or a year
Okay.
or whatever.
But she was going to die from it. Neurologic impairment is a whole other issue. So the problem is that these words do not have definitions as clear as we want them to be. We want to know that this means something specific. My plan was to advise you not to complete a living will and to rely on a healthcare proxy instead, and that's what I'm going to do because I still think it's best, and we're going to get back to that. Here's a New York State healthcare proxy. You can download it. Oh. You don't have to download it because I brought copies for you guys. You don't get one because they're all over the place in Columbia. Here, pass those around. Now you have no excuse not to fill one out. Okay, so I'm not. You can read the specifics, but just understand that what the healthcare proxy does is it allows someone else to speak for you when you can't speak for yourself. And if you've completed this properly, nobody can argue with that other person. It is a legal document. They have the same rights that you have to choose or reject care. Okay? It doesn't require, yes?
Different in different states?
It's different in different states. This is New York State. But no, actually, the healthcare, like the healthcare surrogate, it's called different things in different states. Like I work in Connecticut, it's called power of attorney for healthcare. But there isn't a state where I've been to where the healthcare proxy isn't supremely legally empowered to make decisions regardless. Not even Alabama, I don't think. The proxy can speak for you and make decisions for you, and those decisions cannot be challenged. Okay, so you assign an agent, you can assign an alternate agent, and you don't need a lawyer for this, okay? So you have to sign it, and then it has to be witnessed, okay? The only technicality in this is that the witness, that it has to have two witnesses, can't be the people who you assigned as your proxy or as your alternate proxy. They can't sign as witnesses. You can get the next two people who walked in front of the Bhakti Center off the sidewalk, say, please sign here. It's fine. You don't need a lawyer, you don't need a notary public. It's very easy to do. You could all do this today in this room with each other.
Would this apply with, let's say you take a vacation somewhere and you get sick there, would this then apply there? In like a different
That's a really good question. I think that it would have validity. I think that they would have a hard time challenging. And you know what? We don't want to challenge it. So why is it better to do this than have it living will? Because it allows your healthcare agent to act in the spirit of your wishes without being tied to the letter of the living will. And I spent a lot of time showing you guys why you want to be really cautious about what you write down. Because people are going to go, it's not that easy. I find myself saying that to people all the time. It's not that easy. Watch out what you're writing. Because you might wind up with people having to follow it. Could be a good thing or a bad thing. Well, how could it be a bad thing? So if you've completed your healthcare proxy and you've sat down with the person who you designated with your healthcare agent and you've had a lot of beer and you've had a 2-hour conversation about what you want and don't want, and you've gotten really granular and you've talked about wanting spirituality or wanting family connection and under what circumstances you want to be kept alive and under what circumstances you don't, okay? They're going to go, okay. And they're going to follow your wishes. Should you find yourself in a condition your doctors define as mental incapacity, but in which you are in fact quite capacitated, you just can't show it to anyone, okay? But unable to tell anyone, you may not only want to live, but you may be quite aware of having your plug pulled. You're like, oh, well, he's vegetative, just do it. You may feel hunger, pain, shortness of breath, and terror. I took care of a guy who was 26 who had a traumatic brain injury, and after 2 years, his parents finally came to the conclusion that he wouldn't want to live that way. We didn't know what he was. We didn't know what he was getting, but he was definitely a little bit there. And we stopped his tube feeding. It took him 6 weeks to die. I don't want to be awake for that. Since we cannot know now whether or not this might happen, to my mind, that means that we all have to decide now what we want to do, even though we don't know what it's going to be like. You've got to decide now. You've got to tell your proxy now. Remember Woody Allen's speech to the graduates? More than at any other time in history, mankind faces a crossroads. One path leads to despair and utter hopelessness, the other to total extinction. Let us pray we have the wisdom to choose correctly. That's how this started to feel to me. So in neurologic impairment, which is really common and will happen to people in this room, the choice is to be kept alive in a condition in which suffering can persist for months or years with no reasonable hope of recovery, or to be allowed to die when life still offers quality and meaning. But the decision has to be made. Because if you don't make the decision, the doctors will decide for you and they'll keep you alive. Now, that may be just by accident what you actually wanted, but you want to make the choice.
In that 6 weeks that took for him to die, was he feeling anything?
Well, not with Dr. Feelgood taking care of him, because I put him to sleep for the whole time. That was the solar eclipse in Alaska. Isn't it pretty? I just wanted to give you guys a little more relief from all of this. That's as eclipsey as it got, because it's so far north. And we were so lucky that the clouds parted for us. And there's a couple of grizzly bears. It's funny, because when you're in a place that's that remote, the grizzly bears don't even see you. Grizzly bears are a problem when they're like, oh, humans, food. And I said to my buddy who I backpack with in Alaska, I said, what do you think they think of us? Because they don't see, there were no people there. We were 150 miles into the wilderness. There was no people at all. And he looked at me without missing a beat and he said, space aliens. And literally, the bears would go like that, they'd go. I changed my living will, which I'm not going to have, based on a decision that I made. My decision was, if everybody's looking at me and they're going, we don't know if he's conscious or not, I'm done. Maybe I'll decide in that moment, wait, don't, no, really, I'm good. I have to decide now. Okay? So the italicized part says, I wish to have all interventions stopped and to be provided with palliative sedation with no other interventions until my death. Notice how different that is from some of what you guys said, which is, I wish to have all measures necessary to assure my comfort. I don't want comfort measures. I want a coma. I want to be completely and utterly out until I'm dead. Because I don't want to take the chance that I'm going to be lying there going, oh my God, this is awful. I'm starving to death. Or, oh my God, this is awful. They're about to unplug the ventilator and I'm going to be short of breath. And I'm going to die front and center. Palliative sedation, which is being rendered unconscious until you're dead, is the only thing I could think of to assure that I'm not front and center to my own actual being conscious of my death in the moment, in a way where I'm short of breath or hungry or in pain. People say, just shoot me. It's not funny, because we can't shoot you. Like, if I ever get like that, just shoot me. Ha ha. It's like, we can't shoot you. So you have to decide what you really want us to do. And that has to be part of the conversation.
The difference in the two italicized sections is what? Palliative sedation?
It's palliative sedation versus comfort measures.
Right.
Comfort measures was way too vanilla for me. Okay, I want pentobarbital infusion.
Specificity.
I want propofol. Okay, I want succinylcholine. I don't want morphine.
Well, I have a question. If you have a spiritual approach, would you want to be knocked out? No, you would want to be as present as you can, conscious as you can, right?
I think like with pain, I want some measures. I don't know the exact thing with the pain, but even if it's painful, I want to be conscious. And I feel like if there's like, I know Ganeshan was there once when they pulled the tube with someone, but he was asked to go and chant while that was happening, like to say the holy name. And I feel like if that's there, for me, I want that. And I know that's my own personal, I want to
The
be
person
conscious.
who was told was able to chant?
No, he
They
was
chanted for
chanting
him.
them.
Right.
And I feel like, just kind of like, I think I'd want to be conscious. Kind of want to,
That's what I thought.
personally.
Yeah.
I mean,
So-
and if the holy name is there and that feeling.
Awareness.
That I'm aware when this is coming.
But isn't that the point of these discussions?
Yeah.
Because what's right
Exactly.
for you is not
different.
how you feel, it's not
Exactly.
how.
Yeah.
And Ganeshan, do you feel the same way, that you would rather have more consciousness and be a little uncomfortable?
Yeah, again, if a little uncomfortable is one thing, like if it's, terrible pain and suffering and that's felt and that's seen by others, then, I would to reduce that if that's possible, but I also don't want to like completely truck when I have no awareness.
So when you're done with your healthcare proxy and you have that drunken conversation with whomever it is, Bhakti, I assume, you got to get really granular about what you want. But the brilliance of this and the wonderfulness of this law is that it gives every single person the right to make that choice. Okay? Whatever you want.
But if you're not able to express how you're feeling, and that's that gray area.
Well, no, because, so I hoped I had addressed that, because my feeling is that I'm going to take the risk that if everybody is saying I'm incapacitated, right, that hopefully I'm incapacitated and I'm really not feeling much and they're going to sedate me and pull the plug and let me die. But I'm taking the risk that maybe I'm far more aware than people know. But I just want to be sedated and let go. Okay? But I'm taking that risk. What I said before is you have to make the decision now while you can still talk about it.
If you're on morphine, you still experience the pain of.
I love morphine.
Morphine's great.
Lots of it.
Right, so you don't-
I want enough
I thought
morphine.
You were saying that wasn't enough. You wanna-
I want to. I just want to be. I want to be unconscious. I'll take the pentobarbital and some morphine, please, and propofol. Can you give me a menu? So I said this to you. The terminal illness piece was kind of easy. Not in terms of it being an easy thing to experience, but in terms of giving you clarity of the choices you want to make. Because in terminal illness, you know where it's going. So you can decide how you're going to spend that last time, whether it's feeling pain and having chanting or whatever it may be. So that's why it was easy for me to write, just, if I'm going to be dead in 2 weeks, just put me under and pull the plug. This is my sort of life mentor, a woman named Lenora Hahn. She was a writing teacher and a mentor to the Beats. This photo was probably taken about 1950. She always liked to tell the story that when Allen Ginsberg first read Howl in his apartment, she was doing something else that night and couldn't go. For those of you who don't know Howl, it's this iconic Beats poem by Allen Ginsberg. And when she got to be in her 60s, she made me into her healthcare proxy. She was a real character. She lived in, does everybody know the West Beth on Bethune Street, sort of the artist colony down in the West Village? She lived there. There was always a Chesterfield burning in every room of her apartment in the ashtray. So I did her healthcare proxy, and I said, okay, Lenora, now we have to talk about what you want. And I was expecting to have this huge conversation. And here's what she said.
Oh, that's great.
And I have to say that there's something to be said for simplicity. I actually did wind up taking care of her as a doctor at the end of her life in the hospital. And it got to a point where things were looking kind of messy and doubtful. And I said, she told me what she wants. I sedated her, and I took her off of all therapy, and she died. I asked another guy what he wanted. We were just kind of talking, and he said this. It's not as kind of dumb as it looks. I had a patient in hospice who had a bowel obstruction. So she couldn't eat because her bowels were blocked. Her stomach was blocked. And I said to her, what do you want? She said, I want to have oysters and vodka. What? She said, I want to have oysters and vodka. So I sent her for something called a venting gastrostomy. Okay, so that's a tube that goes in your stomach so that everything you swallow comes out the tube. Since it had nowhere to go, everything she ate, she'd vomit, which was really unpleasant. So we'd put this tube in, and she would eat, and it would just come right back out the tube. She'd swallow it, and you'd just see it come right out the tube. We got her the venting gastrostomy, and we got her some oysters and vodka, and we ate them together.
Did she enjoy it?
Yeah. So did I. Okay, so I'm going to do the rest of this a little bit quicker. Please don't not have a healthcare proxy. Please don't not have a healthcare proxy. If you come to part 1 of my talk, you'll know why. You do not want to be in the system incapacitated with nobody representing you. The system will process you through and make a bundle of dough off you. It's a whole other 3-hour talk. Please don't not have a healthcare proxy. But there is a law in New York State. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because we're running out of time. Yes?
Okay, so I do know who's going to be my primary healthcare proxy, but I was thinking about the alternate agent, and I don't have any family in the U.S. So can I pick, for example, my sister
Sure.
who is in Colombia?
Yeah, but you just have to be able to make sure that your sister who's in Colombia can get on a plane and come here, which these days is harder than it sounds. I would make it like somebody who's nearby. And I advise people, maybe it's not such a good idea to make your healthcare proxy someone to whom you're emotionally connected.
Someone who's what?
To whom you are emotionally connected.
Emotionally connected?
Yeah, like somebody who loves you.
Oh.
Because it may be harder for them to follow when the rubber hits the road in the hospital, it's very, 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 very different in terms of how you feel. When you're sitting around a beer, it's one thing. When you're standing around a ventilator, it's something else. Am I wrong? Families go through it. Okay, so this is the Family Healthcare Decisions Act. It's a great law. It has a part about developmentally disabled people and intellectually disabled people that winds up in New York State. If you're intellectually disabled and you wind up on life support, it's a terrible experience because it's really hard to get them off because of all the laws. And all the laws come out of the days of Willowbrook and awful things that were done to developmentally disabled people. I've had people in the hospital who are developmentally disabled where, you know, everybody, the family, the friends, everybody wanted them off of the ventilator, but some people had to come from Albany to the hospital from the Office of Mental Disabilities. They had to come down and vet that plug pulling. And I was like, so when are you coming? They're like, oh, 3 weeks. Well, he's going to be dead in a week. So it was hard. Actually, this tells me every hour. So you can't see it here, but there is a hierarchy of decision makers. Here's a MOLS form for everybody. There's a hierarchy of decision makers. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait, don't hand that out yet. It's the wrong form. Sorry. There's a hierarchy of decision makers. So it starts out with your court-appointed guardian and then your spouse, and it sort of goes down. So there's this hierarchy of people who are assigned to make decisions for you if you can't make decisions for yourself and you don't have a healthcare proxy, okay? Now, who in this room has a family that will all be in agreement about what to do with you? Will all be in agreement about what to do with you? Your mother, your father, your sister, your spouse, da-da-da-da. They're all going to go, yes, sure, yeah, that's what we should do. That was easy. Let's all go out. And families get really crazy. Okay? So even though this establishes one person who has the right, everybody else is going to be screaming at them. Okay? The healthcare agent, so the healthcare proxy is the form, the healthcare agent, that's it. It's their choice, period. Done. This also, unfortunately, it establishes restrictions in terms of whether or not you can be taken off of life support that the person who's your surrogate has to follow. So it says, the medical treatment would be an extraordinary burden to the patient, and the patient is terminally or permanently unconscious or has an irreversible or incurable condition, and the treatment would involve such pain, suffering, or other burden that it would reasonably be considered inhumane or excessively burdensome under the circumstances. So you have to like prove this. Whereas if you're somebody's healthcare proxy, you just go up to the doctor and say, stop. but stop. Done.
One comment I wanted to make about the healthcare proxy, because I encountered this a lot as a nurse, and I'm sure you've seen it. Sometimes people, when they choose a healthcare proxy within the family that they're connected to, that person may not be the most appropriate because they can't, when it actually comes to it, they can't either withstand the pressure from the other family members,
Right.
or they just can't emotionally do what it is you really
Exactly.
want them to do. So you got to really, when you pick your healthcare proxy, think about that too. Can
It's-
this person actually stand up to and carry out what it is I need?
So just don't take the designation of a healthcare proxy lightly. As you say, it should be somebody who has fortitude, somebody who can make decisions when the rubber hits the road, and somebody who will be able to do that objectively.
Barbara had a good suggestion. Could you designate, is it a bad idea to have two people designated?
I do not advise it because I think it's going to be a hard time to get them to agree. Remember, a camel is a horse made by committee.
Unless you designate one with a requirement to consult.
One with an alternate. The alternate is there if the primary agent can't be reached.
Well, in the proxy paperwork in Hawaii, it said that if the first person either can't or won't.
The second person can do it.
The second
Yeah.
person will.
The New York State one, I think, does that too. There's lots of instructions that make this clear. I didn't want to go through it. It's not necessary. You've got it written down there.
So you could have two or more.
Yeah. So I wrote "don't be this" next to the part that says decision making for patients who have no capacity and no surrogates. Do not be that. Okay? That means that you're entirely at the mercy of the hospital. Now, this law in New York State tries to make that a reasonable process. And what it does is it allows doctors to make the decision to discontinue life support in someone who can't talk to them and in someone who has no friends or family members to speak for them. Okay? The law was written by lawyers. I've always found this section of this law to be kind of funny. The law was written by lawyers, and it says if the doctors are making the decision, the criteria are the treatment offers the patient no medical benefit because the patient will die imminently. Then you have lawyers fighting about what imminent means, okay? Even if the treatment is provided, and the provision of the treatment would violate accepted medical standards. I'm like, why are we doing it if it violates accepted medical standards, lawyers? We're doctors, we do shit that doesn't violate medical standards. We do stuff that's in keeping with the medical standards. It's nonsense. You don't want to find yourself in this place. Prior to the Family Health Care Decisions Act, people who were incapacitated and had no surrogates had the ignoble pleasure of being treated to death. Happened in New York State hospitals all over New York State, again and again and again. I actually put this up to brag a little bit because I wrote an article about it that got published in the Times. It's amazing to get published in the Times. Okay. Incapacitated, alone, and treated to death. This was before that law, where we felt we had no choice but to treat people till the bitter end because we didn't feel we had the ethical right to make that choice. And this was the illustration for the article. And I really like this illustration. I was at Bronx Lebanon Hospital for 25 years, and this is really what it looked like out the window. I miss it. I've been out of Bronx for a couple of years, but I miss it there. And I always loved how in Bronx you had sort of the grittiness of the South Bronx, which was filled with so many terrific folks who I loved. I had patients for 2 decades there who I really loved. Just wonderful, smart, savvy, street smart people. And then you had sort of Manhattan kind of rising in the distance like the Emerald City. Yeah. And that's how it felt to be there. It felt like you were here and Manhattan was way out there in the mists. Okay, here. This is MOLST, and this is where I'm going to end. MOLST stands for Medical Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. Okay? MOLST is different from a living will, and MOLST is different from a healthcare proxy. MOLST is a set of instructions that tells doctors what to do for you today. Okay? So your conversation with your healthcare agent, right, or what you write down in a living will is usually about an imaginary future. Are you okay?
And I was just asking if she.
Okay. It's usually about an imaginary future. It's like, if I am permanently unconscious, if I am terminally ill, if I am incapacitated, if I am this, if I am that. It's an imaginary future that is the conversation you're having with your agent, and it's an imaginary future is what you're writing down on your living will. The MOLST form says, this is what I want done for me today. Okay? So it's not for healthy people. It's for people with serious medical problems. Okay? Where they're saying, given my understanding of my serious medical problem today, and for those of you who were here at the last talk, you might remember that it is through palliative care that people can come to a better understanding of their condition and their treatment options. And if you have that deep understanding of what's going on with you and what can be done, this is a form that allows you to, in a very granular way, to specify what you want done today. If I wind up in the emergency room this afternoon, this is what I want. Not if I wind up in the emergency room this afternoon and 2 months from now I'm unconscious, here's what I might want then. It's today. Okay? And it has everything in it. It has resuscitation, tube feeding, antibiotics, comfort measures, the whole gamut. Unless you have a serious medical condition, this is not the form for you. But again, it is an excellent, enforceable, legal form that doctors can't argue with. Okay? You can fill it out now if you want to, but I don't recommend it. Because unless you have a serious medical condition, to my mind, let them do what they can do to help you out for a while. And we'll get to that on the MOLST form. Let them do what they can do. And then see how things go. You might get better. But I've had MOLST forms. I had a MOLST form for a gentleman at Bronx Lebanon who had advanced dementia, and finally he stopped eating, which is what happens in dementia. And his family, and he'd filled one of these out that said he didn't want a feeding tube. And I'm not being hyperbolic when I say his family was arranged in a semicircle in the hallway. And I was here, and every one of them was screaming at me to put in a feeding tube, and I was doing this. It says no. It says no. I can't do it. We're going to our lawyer. Here's my cell phone. Go ahead. I'm breaking the law if I do that. So this is also a very powerful form. It's page 2. The only thing about this form that makes it a little bit more complicated than the healthcare proxy is that a doctor has to sign it. And it has to be renewed every 3 months. But I'm going to tell you that every 3 months. It's still good if you don't renew it, but it should be renewed every 3 months. And it's actually smart to have it renewed every 3 months because people's condition changes, and they may make different decisions. Now, I will tell you that it's still not as good as a healthcare agent, okay? And the reason that it's not as good as a healthcare agent is because the doctors have to find it and read it, okay? And it's actually, the New York State one is, they call it pulsar pink. It's in this pink that literally goes when you look at it. It's supposed to stand out. I got called to the ICU at Bronx Lebanon when I was there for, some poor person in bed 10 who was swirling downwards by the head of the ICU, and I went and got the chart, and lo and behold, in the back was emulsed. It was a copy, it wasn't in pink, it was emulsed. It said, I don't want hospitalization, I don't want life support, I don't want antibiotics, I want comfort measures, I want hospice. Meanwhile, the guy's like maxed out in the corner on everything that you can give. So I took the form, and all the docs are on rounds. You know what rounds are, right? Where they get in a little cluster, and they go from bed to bed, and the residents and the attendings, it's very serious, right? Been at the hospital a really long time, and I just went right up into the middle of the rounds, and I just went right into the center of it, and I go, you guys, most form for bed 10, most form. It says, don't do any of this shit. I'd been there a really long time, I knew them really well, so I could do that. It says, don't do this. And literally, the director of the ICU, who is a good friend of mine, looks up at me and says, so take him to hospice, and just goes on with rounds. That's why you want a person who says no, not a piece of paper that gets lost in the chart. The person comes in with the healthcare proxy and says, I'm making decisions. Everybody got it? I'm making decisions. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I'm not going to do this. So there's all kinds of stuff that's on the internet about how to complete a MOLS form. And there's actually all kinds of guidance for doctors in terms of how to complete it, which is very useful. And I was going to do that if we have time, but we don't. I'm over. So you had asked the question about why shouldn't I do it now? And then I said, well, because you kind of want them, like you want to give them a chance. Like if you come in and I'm your doctor in the hospital and you're like, I don't want any of this stuff. I'm like, oh, come on, this is what I do. Give me a chance here. Maybe I can get you better. I looked at your stuff. Maybe we could get you a little better. I mean, just, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Right? So you can actually specify on your MOLS form, or the person who's making decisions for you, the same kind of stuff that I said on my living will. Okay, trial of all indicated medical interventions in the hospital, including antibiotics, IV fluid, ventilator, etc. In the event the patient does not respond to the above interventions and is the attending's opinion that chance of recovery is remote, the surrogate elects to transfer the patient to inpatient hospice or the equivalent, where comfort-only measures will be provided. But you can see, I wrote this years ago. I was actually training doctors on how to use MOLST. And you can see that since then, my language has become much more specific. Even in just the last couple of years, my language in terms of what I want done for me is much more specific and direct and doesn't leave any wiggle room. So you can, on a MOLST, you can sort of give the docs a chance to help. And then say, when it's enough, it's enough. When in doubt, out. One moment. Can I call you back in 3 minutes? 5 minutes? Thank you. And there's an eMOLST. So actually, you don't even need to have the form. There's a form that can be accessed online for anybody that can be accessed by doctors, but like 1 doctor in 100 has an eMOLST account. So again, it's your healthcare agent you want. This is only in New York. And there's a moose for you.
I was chased by others once.
That's scary. They're big.
They're huge.
So I'm done. You guys have questions?
Is there a most that's just for New York, or each state has their own?
So some states have them and some states don't. Some states call them POLST, which is physician orders for life-sustaining treatment. And so it's pretty common, like in Oregon and Washington, California have it, I think. Connecticut just did one. It just became legal like 3 weeks ago. So it's catching on around the country. But again, it's very granular. You know, it allows you really to get down to specifics in terms of what you want done. But again, I recommend, it's only for people who have a serious medical problem because it's saying what you want today. If somebody who is, for whatever reason, is young or old or whatever, but basically healthy, and you show up in the emergency room, give the poor folks a chance to try to get you better. I mean, well, I went to medical school in the beginning to learn how to make people better from sickness. And that's still my favorite thing to do. I love it when I get patients and I make them better and they go home. I like it when people go get surgery for cancer and get cured and they're done and they go back to work. That's my favorite thing.
Do you have any suggestions for initiating conversations or approaching people to become healthcare proxies?
Such an amazing question. So Google the Conversation Project.
What?
The Conversation Project. There's a whole organization devoting itself to how to get these conversations started. The woman who started MOLST in New York is a doc upstate named Pat Bomba. And what she does is nobody gets turkey at Thanksgiving until they've done their healthcare proxy.
I like it.
Literally. She says, I hand out the form to everybody in the room, and everybody has to finish it, and I have to look at it and make sure it's done properly, and then you get your turkey. It's called the Conversation Project. It's excellent. Excellent.
Can you share with us the final living will that you showed, that you have made?
For me?
Yes. And can we get copies of that?
Yeah.
I took a picture of it.
So basically what my living will says is, give me a shot. Do all the shit that you need to do. Intubate me, do resuscitation, give me the antibiotics, do the whole thing. If I need dialysis, go ahead, do dialysis. Do everything you need to do, right? And let the good doctors who really actually do want their patients to get better, let them do their thing until they get to a place where they're saying, he's not going to get better. Okay? He's not going to get better. But I'm not going to use this because I get so worried about someone coming along and saying, wait a minute, wait, that part there, that's not what's happening here. And I spent so much time on all the neurologic hazardai to show you how uncertain and complicated and messy it is, to sort of encourage you not to do a living will. But if your healthcare agent comes along and your healthcare agent is your friend or whomever, your healthcare agent who's known you, your healthcare agent goes, this is not what she wanted. But, well, there may be some consciousness there. Okay, fine. So there's some consciousness there. This is not what she wanted or he wanted. So do the palliative sedation and let's get this done. It just takes it, and that's why in one of the slides says, it allows your healthcare agent to act in the spirit of your wishes without being tied to the letter of your wishes.
So is this something you would give your healthcare agent?
No,
to
this is
have?
just something I gave you guys to talk about what a living will was. And I actually first started trying to write a living will about 15 years ago, and I still haven't finished it. And I don't even like this one.
Well, would this give your healthcare proxy some guidance if they started to get stuck?
No, what gives my healthcare proxy some guidance in what to do for me is the fact that we've been friends since 10th grade and she knows what I want. That's what gives her guidance. She'll be in the hospital saying, Joe didn't want this. Well, but we're not sure if he's vegetative. No, forget it. That's not what he wanted. I can tell by looking at him right now. I'm kind of more toward if I can't open my own beer side of things. Any other questions, guys? You guys have been very quiet.
Yeah, just taking it all in. I've never listened to the topics before. Me either.
And I want to tell you, it's interesting for me to be talking to so many young people about this, because I'm actually starting to get a little older now. I just got up every day and it happened, right? It's actually harder for me now. It's harder for me now to do all of this stuff. And it's harder for me now because I sort of have more of a relationship to the spectrum of a life. To sort of, like we talk about children having milestones, but those milestones don't stop, People get married and have children or don't. People develop friendships. People have family relationships. People have careers, and they span through life. And to me, even when I have a patient now who's like self-made millionaire, chair of the hospice board of directors, amazing family, happy marriage, traveled the world, 92 years old, about to die. And it's harder for me now because I understand more now the meaning of all of that. And the kid who was 26, I have a daughter at the time who was exactly the same age. I would stand in front of his mother with my mouth hanging open, not knowing what to say. Like,
What do you say about the 92-year-old that it's harder?
it's harder for me now than it was when I was younger like these guys, because I have more of and I don't mean to speak ill of you as young people, but I think I have more of a connection to what the span of a life is, to what it means to have people you love and lose them, and maybe have children and watch them grow up, and maybe have a career, and maybe fulfill your dreams or not, and then get old. I had a patient who was 101 who I admitted to hospice. 101. She was totally lucid. I was admitting her to hospice, and she was in a bed next to the window, and I came in, and she was just sort of staring out the window. And I said, "What's going on?" She said, "Well, I'm in hospice." And I thought to myself, it doesn't make a bit of difference if you're 101. You want to get out of bed the next morning and go about your life. It doesn't get easier. It doesn't. People aren't. I mean, some people, I guess, maybe spirituality helps, or the belief in an afterlife helps to be more ready. But I think most people are sort of like, I don't want to die. I want to have a bagel. You guys have other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
No, sorry, I just had a comment. I just wanted to say that I'm very grateful, to hear these talks. They're very valuable to me. I know that eventually, death is going to be, I'm going to have to deal with death at some point. So
I check my calendar and I have no time for it coming up.
I do feel better equipped to deal
Good.
with it when it comes. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Zach.
Just I want to say, I'm not letting you out of the room until you do your healthcare proxies, but do your healthcare proxies. Everybody should have a healthcare proxy, young and old.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.